Alright, what's going on, guys? So right now we're pretty much at the end of Cold War Zombies, and today we're going to be ranking the overall top 20 best loadout weapons to use in this game, and this will likely be the final time we make a very large list ranking all of the loadout weapons, because pretty much all of the guns at this point have been released, and unless there's some absolutely groundbreaking ones in Season 6, this will probably be comprehensive for this point on and to the rest of Cold War's life cycle, and even in years to come. But so, today we're going to be looking at the top 20 best loadouts to use in Cold War Zombies, and if you guys want to follow along and create these for yourselves, I think you'll find this very useful. Now, before we get too deep into this, real quick life update just for the channel. I haven't uploaded in about a week. I'm working on a very big, basically Cold War retrospective type video that's taken me a long time to write, but that's going to be coming out pretty soon. I'm also moving to Texas for a little while in just a couple of days, so I've been sorting out everything I need to do with the move. As soon as I get there, content will be picking up as usual, but just uploads may be sporadic for the next couple of days as I get settled in there. Also, there is limited time merch available now. I've put these hoodies together and I'm really happy with how they turned out. It's getting colder. I know everyone needs a hoodie, so if you want to go check it out, link is in the description, and if you end up getting one, please do tweet me or just let me know in the comments so I can thank you. The support you guys have shown on that and everything else has been amazing, so thank you very much for that and for sticking around and continuing to support. If you guys enjoyed this video, this took me a while to produce, so if you don't mind dropping a thumbs up, that would be awesome. And of course, subscribe if you're new to the channel and you enjoy zombies and are looking forward to Vanguard and stuff, because I'm gonna have you covered there. Anyway, sorry for the long intro. I just had a lot of things I needed to get out there, but without further ado, let's jump into it. So coming today at the number 20 spot is the C58 assault rifle, and I can't sit here and tell you that this is like literally the best AR in the game. By no means does this have like the fastest time to kill or anything like really crazy where it just outdoes a lot of the other weapons in its corresponding class, but the C58 is really good for headshots, and because of that, you're really gonna want to make sure you take your time to go for that sort of thing, because it doesn't really have a great time to kill when shooting the body, but it absolutely melts through headshots. And this is going to be obviously the recommended attachment loadout for this. I do think that it has some weaknesses, particularly the fire rate. The C58 almost falls in this really weird middle ground between being an AR and an LMG. It's very strange, but it's definitely not like the greatest gun in the game out of anything, but it's certainly still really good and actually beats a lot of the like standard ARs in Cold War Zombies. Iron sights aren't anything great, so I would recommend whatever optic or scope of your choice. That really doesn't matter. It actually does perform pretty well long range with scopes, but definitely wanted to include the C58 on this list because I feel like it doesn't get a lot of the attention that it deserves. But moving on to number 19, we have the EM2 assault rifle, which in a lot of ways is pretty similar to the C58 with a couple of key differences. Number one, the EM2 comes with its own built-in optic. It's like this weird like 2x magnification scope, which I actually quite like. As far as the recommended loadout, I actually don't change the optic on mine, but feel free to do it on yours if you don't really like it so much. Just like the C58, the biggest change you'll probably notice is just like how much this is effective at headshots versus the body. The time to kill is like almost a different weapon if you aren't hitting the head. So things like the traditional optic on it and also a laser sight can really help get, you know, these crucial headshots that will just make your time to kill that much faster. It's also a very good weapon to use in Outbreak, which I can't really say the same for the C58. I don't know exactly what it is, but the EM2 just seems to handle itself a lot better in pretty much every objective. This gun does struggle as well a little bit in the fire rate department, but it's not so bad that it's unusable as a weapon. It's also very a fun weapon to use. It got added a couple of seasons ago, so maybe if you haven't played the game in a while, you may not have even tried out the EM2, so I do strongly recommend it, and if you have these attachments, certainly run this loadout. So anyways, moving on and coming in at number 18, we have the AUG tac rifle. Now, I feel like this gun is like obviously exceptional, but I feel like it could have been made meaningfully different to something like the M16, for example, with one minor change. I feel like there should be an attachment to make this full auto. With the right attachment set up, the AUG, even despite being a burst fire weapon, is still unbelievably dangerous, but it remains a 3-round burst even after pack-a-punch, which a lot of the other tac rifles don't do that. And that's probably the biggest point in which the AUG kind of gets screwed, in my opinion, is it doesn't have the luxury of being full auto. It does still have the high power that tac rifles have in Cold War Zombies, but it doesn't get the 6-round burst mechanic like a lot of the other tac rifles do once pack-a-punched either. Also, I will say the default scope really is kind of bulky and annoying and can literally cause you to miss like maybe plague hounds or hellhounds running around, other important information that you actually might want to see. It takes up a pretty large percentage of your screen, so anything as far as like red dots or even other scope optics are probably better for this weapon. That component will come down in large part just to personal preference, but I really do like the AUG as much as I sound like I might be complaining about it. I just don't think it's the best tac rifle, but when you stack this amongst the other just weapons in the game generally, it's still pretty much up there. It beats the Mark 14 and the Type 63 by a country mile, but in terms of in its own class, it definitely isn't the best, but it's still pretty amazing with this loadout. Anyways, coming up next is a weird gun I've really never put on any list before, but I'm gonna do it now because of how the meta of this game shifted. The RPG low-key is kind of a good weapon now. Of course, this doesn't have attachment slots like a lot of the, traditional weapons in Cold War Zombies do, so you can't really make this any better or worse via your own loadout, but just running it as a weapon honestly is kind of viable now, especially if you're struggling against the Legion boss fight. With the addition of Mule Kick in particular, and the ability for this to reload in your back pocket is the most underrated feature I think I've ever seen. And it fundamentally changes the viability of this weapon. Like, no joke, it's legitimately kind of good now. Like I said, extremely effective against taking out Legion, and even pretty good against Ordas, so I don't think you'll actually have that many problems using this if you do decide to run it. With the addition of Mule Kick as well, you have the option to carry 3 weapons, so it's not a bad idea to take this around as a third while you have your other 2, like, main weapon and also, like, wonder weapon. But nonetheless, I do feel like the RPG certainly deserved a spot on this list. But coming up next, this is going to have to be the AK-47 assault rifle. Now, I feel like this is probably like one of the best guns just for literally shooting zombies and not much else. I know that sounds obvious, but I really don't think the AK is that good in like very like specialized situations. For example, boss fights, I don't really know if it quite gets the job done. Anything long range, it doesn't really as well. And the main problem with this weapon is the fact that the damage barrel, which you're pretty much going to want to always run on these kinds of weapons, cause it to have a pretty insane amount of kick and recoil, which of course can be mitigated somewhat through attachments, but especially when adding a long range scope to the AR is pretty like unmanageable, to be honest. If you're a player that likes the scoped AR playstyle, you probably won't want to do that on the AK. You're gonna need something like a red dot, or hell, even just use the iron sights. Yeah, overall, it's got a very impressive time to kill. It's a pretty practical and just easy weapon to use other than the recoil issue. Doesn't really have too many weaknesses, but it doesn't have that like really specialized cutout capability like some of the other weapons we're going to discuss, but is still viable and fun nonetheless, so do strongly recommend the AK. Coming up next, though, at number 15, we have the Ballistic Knife, which, once again, pretty similar case to the RPG in the way that it doesn't have the ability and room for different attachments to run on it, but the Ballistic Knife has a lot of very unique properties that not make it only just viable, but even good. Like, for instance, the ability to revive teammates after the Ballistic Knife has been pack-a-punched is probably one of the most criminally underrated elements of this. The Ballistic Knife has always done this in zombies, but it does make that returning feature in Cold War. Also, if you have your melee class fully upgraded, every time you swipe a zombie with the melee, you get a little bit of HP back, and this can save you if you happen to get swarmed or something. The Ballistic Knife is also extremely effective against armored enemies when paired with something like Shatterblast or even Deadwire for regular enemies. It's pretty insane. And combined with Ring of Fire, you can absolutely decimate Ordas inside of Firebase E or even Outbreak. I think it would be interesting if ever one day the Ballistic Knife had the opportunity to have different attachments run on it. I don't know how exactly they would make that happen, but you can pretty much only run the vanilla Ballistic Knife, but it is something that I do strongly recommend, as it is a genuine good weapon in Cold War. But moving on, coming in at number 14 is the Tec9 SMG. I can guarantee you, if this weapon had released with the like base game of Cold War, this would probably be the worst SMG in the entire game, because it seems like after like the initial weapons offering, everything that's come in like post seasons have always been really cracked. Like, this gun is just literally above and beyond any other SMG, pretty much entirely in its class. Honestly, with the optimal loadout build like you're seeing on screen, it's not really an aesthetically pleasing weapon all that much, but you cannot deny it is really good. Time to kill is incredibly fast, and even if you combine this with Napalm Burst, it's even faster. Not much recoil to speak of at all. The reload time is quite fast. The only thing it doesn't have amazing is possibly the magazine size, but again, that is kind of mitigated through the unbelievably fast reload time. Mobility is great with this as well, and it's pretty much good for anything that you're going to be fighting up close. Now, I will say it is not really cut out very much for anything long distance engagement wise, and I honestly really wouldn't recommend an Outbreak. Basically, the Tec9 is pretty much the best for fighting anything that isn't armor. Of course, the same case could be made good for a lot of the just general SMG class, although I do think that's exceptionally true for the OTS-9, but it's definitely not something you're going to want to sleep on. Interestingly, the damage barrel doesn't really add any significant amount of recoil, at least not that I could tell anyways, nothing that makes it unusable, so there's absolutely no reason not to apply it. But anyways, coming up next on our list is a weapon I've changed pretty dramatically on since the last time I ranked this, but this is going to be the Stoner 63, and typically I would create this loadout-wise to be a little bit more of like a run-and-gun slash movement-friendly LMG, but I feel like at this point in the game, if you're running an LMG, you kind of know what you want. If you're going to commit to a heavy weapon like this, you may as well make it optimized for holding down a particular like line of sight or some sort of holdout spot, and then really center the attachments around that playstyle, and that's what I've done with this particular loadout, and I do recommend you try this one. This one's a lot more like camping friendly. It's not so great at movement, but if you're a player that genuinely enjoys like holding out in one location and just having a weapon that has a ton of ammo is an absolute laser beam, then this particular Stoner loadout will definitely be for you. It like fundamentally changes how the weapon works depending on the attachment options you run on it. You can make this basically an AR, or you can make this like a true honest to God name LMG. Good news is you can have pretty much two different options of this, and you can make them both in your like blueprint selection, so you can basically switch them on the fly, which is really nice. But yeah, like I said, I feel like if you're running an LMG, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into, and if you may as well just double down on the strength of it, and that's what I feel like this loadout does. But moving on from that, coming in at number 12 is the FFAR assault rifle. So I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit on this one, but recently I've become a lot more of a fan of it. FFAR's biggest strength is shooting a lot of things for a long period of time. With the right loadout attachments, the magazine size on this is astronomical, and in fact better than honestly a lot of the other weapon types that should in theory have a better magazine than it. Now, it doesn't have the best like damage per bullet, and that's something that you'll see opposed in like the C58 and even the EM2, but it definitely makes up for it in terms of fire rate. It's essentially the exact opposite of those two guns. If you like just the more, you know, shoot from the hip, run and gun playstyle, you are going to go for headshots, but you're not like bent up about it. The FFAR doesn't really seem to have much of a TTK difference between getting headshots and not. At least it's not as dramatic as something like those other high-powered bullet weapons. Generally speaking, I do recommend the suppressor, however, because I feel like this could also help you get better equipment, but also it does need a little bit of vertical recoil control in my opinion. But it is still an absolutely stellar gun nonetheless, and I strongly recommend you use it. But up next, coming in at number 11 is the Tec9 SMG. Now, really sadly, unfortunately, Treyarch nerfed this weapon. It's no longer as good as it used to be, even like a month ago when we last ranked it. It is still absolutely phenomenal. However, what Treyarch did nerf was the full auto build of the Tec9, and I did play around with the burst fire mode a little bit, but to be honest, I didn't really feel much of a difference, and so I am still going to recommend at this point that you do use the full auto because it just makes the gun significantly more practical, but this is where I feel the most optimized loadout for this build is. This magazine attachment in particular as well is going to give you the best overall time to kill, although it may look like on paper there's better magazine options. In practicality, if you just want to be putting out the most damage consistently, this is the magazine to run. And other than that, I don't think you'll find the Tec9 to have many other problems as well, and I feel like it's still probably one of the best, if not the best gun for taking on the Legion boss fight. One final thing about the Tec9, you guys will see a lot of the times using just iron sights on a weapon, and specifically for the Tec9, I almost like the iron sights better than any of the optics on it. I don't know why, it just feels significantly more accurate without any sights, but if you do personally prefer like a red dot or something like that, feel free to run that as well. Alright, up next we have our number 10 spot going to the Pharah assault rifle, and again, I've kind of tweaked this one a little bit as well since last time, and I feel like this has basically the exact same problem as the AK does, where it's like really good at just shooting zombies up close, but you need the damage barrel on it if you want to be doing the, you know, maximum amount of damage, but it does make it have a very, very dramatic amount of recoil to a point where you really can't run any long-range scopes and hope to have any amount of success. This is also absolutely not one of those guns where you want to rely on the iron sights because they are not very pretty on the Pharah. You are going to want some kind of optic, more or less a red dot, and I think that's probably where it shines most, but it is a very solid AR nonetheless, and it shreds. With the addition of depth perception to the game, the like additional 25% armor damage increase that you'll deal to those enemies, you can really feel it on the Pharah. And I don't know if it's just me, but it's something that's like completely obvious when running this weapon, and a lot of ways feels like a totally different gun, especially for high rounds. Also, on another note, just the name of the gun itself and the pack-a-punch name of this weapon is low-key kind of a good joke. I don't mind giving him props for that one. Anyways, coming up next, we have the Diamatti pistols, and in my last ranking, you guys gave me absolute misery for not including this on the list, and fair enough, because it definitely deserves a spot, and I feel like if we're ranking 20 weapons, the Diamatti is easily going to fall somewhere on this list, and they're actually quite good. Now, in all honesty, there aren't a ton of different selections for what you can run attachment-wise, but the most important ones are, of course, the Task Force barrel, and not to mention the just fact that you can dual wield them. There's absolutely no reason to have these just as a single pistol. Obviously, with dual wield, this negates your ability to aim down the sights, but you really don't need to because the hip fire is extraordinary on the Diamattis, and despite being a burst fire weapon, are pretty easy to control, all things considered. You got a very comparable time to kill with some of the shotguns even, but I don't think they're quite as good as some of the other pistols, which we'll get into a little bit later, although they absolutely deserved a spot somewhere on this list, and I certainly wanted to include these. But moving on, coming in at number 8, we have the XM4, and for whatever reason, this is literally just one of my favorite weapons to use of all time, and has been since Cold War released. I think it's one of the aesthetically best looking weapons, honestly. It feels good to play, and it's on top of that an extremely effective weapon for pretty much anything as well. Now, of course, it does not boast that like really fast time to kill like the Pharah and AK do, but what it does have that they don't is that consistency. And I really think that's one of the most underrated attributes of these weapons. Like, especially if you're playing Outbreaks, you need a consistent weapon to be able to do all the objectives, because if you run into a situation where your weapon is kind of ineffective and what you're currently doing, your entire game may just end. And I've never really had that problem with the XM4. Now, I have experimented with different attachment setups to make it like a little bit more of a, you know, slower play style, more like a camping one, sort of like the Stoner, but I feel like the most optimized one is the one that I'm currently using, and pretty much have had this one set in stone for a couple of months now. Even if it may not be objectively the best gun in the game, it's amazing, and it's definitely one of the most fun weapons to play in my opinion. So coming in just after that, we have the MG82 LMG, and again, I've tweaked this one very similarly to how we did the Stoner, where again, if you feel like you are running an LMG, you know what you're getting yourself into. So this loadout setup for the MG82 is way more catered towards a more hold down camping play style. The really neat thing about this gun is not only the ridiculous fire rate, the absolutely absurd magazine size, but it's also got a very fast reload cancel speed. This effectively means you can skip like half of the reload animation and instantly get, you know, bullets right back into your magazine and get firing again. So you're pretty much never going to run out of ammo. That on top of the fact that you can swap this into your back pocket with Mule Kick and reload it while you're using something else, and then you can pull it back out and it's full again. There's basically no reason that this weapon won't be, you know, filled up and ready to go. It's absolutely incredible, and it does a very solid amount of damage over time. Way better than all the other LMGs. Maybe not quite as good as the Stoner when you put them side by side, but I think in all things considered is maybe a bit more practical. I'm not the biggest LMG guy, but it's definitely a big choice between those particular two, and it may come down to personal preference at the end of the day. Up next, taking the number 6 spot, guys, is the AMP-63s, and this is like literal proof. I'm telling you, this is honest to God proof that if this weapon had launched with the base game of Cold War, it would suck. I actually have no idea what conversations went on at Treyarch in order to make a pistol of the PM63 literally better than pretty much all of the other SMGs in the game. I often confuse this weapon to be an SMG, even though technically in the game it's classified as a pistol. And this is the like attachment setup that I tend to run on this, and this is more optimized for something like Outbreak, if I'm being honest. The main reason I actually prefer these to the Diamatti pistols is just number one, the practicality. The full auto capability is just like miles above the burst fire Diamattis in my opinion, and also these are a little bit better at like controlling and hitting zombies more at a range. The Diamattis, you get a lot of like random bloom in your burst fires, and you know, it can end up feeling a little bit inconsistent. You get much less of that with the AMP-63s, and again, rewards somewhat of that steady hand that I was talking about earlier. It's super good. It's one of the best guns in the game, hands down, and I still don't quite understand how this is still in the pistol class, or basically how a pistol ended up being one of the best guns in the game, but that's Cold War Zombies. Coming up just above that, taking our number 5 spot, is the Street Sweeper shotgun. So this is one of the post-launch shotguns added, and if you've been kind of following the trend of what we've been talking about, you would assume that this shotgun would be far and away better than the other ones that launched. And that's like true and not true all at the same time. I will say the Street Sweeper is a meaningfully different weapon than the other shotguns it launched alongside, but is it more practical or better than them? Well, that's up for debate. We'll say the Street Sweeper with the right attachment setup is a completely different weapon when pack-a-punched versus non-pack-a-punched, and that's typically what most zombie players will be using it as such. I'm not gonna lie, trying to use the Street Sweeper, even with an optimized loadout, without being pack-a-punched, and especially without Mule Kick or Speed Cola, can literally be a miserable nightmare, so that is something you're gonna want to avoid. It doesn't have the same amount of damage per shot as the Hauer or the Gallo. If it did, it would be literally the best gun in the game, like without a question, but it doesn't. So in fact, it even kind of got nerfed, or at least the other shotguns got buffed, whereas the Street Sweeper did not, oddly enough, even though one can make the argument that it needed it the most. But regardless, it's still a very solid weapon. All right, anyways, coming in at number 4, we have the Groza Assault Rifle, which like literally is the best cross between like just the really good all-around practicality of something like the XM4, but still doesn't sacrifice that like really meaty damage that the Pharah and the AK have. And this does have technically on paper the best time to kill out of all of the ARs, but there is also something to be said for practicality, and like I said earlier, it really checks all of those boxes. Now, I will say the Groza may as well have the worst iron sights in the entire game. You literally need to have some kind of sight on this, otherwise you're not really going to be hitting a whole lot. It's a fun gun to use though. I've used this against Legion, also doing the second Outbreak Easter egg and a variety of other boss fights as well. And even just for general high rounds, I don't recommend it as a high rounds gun, but it doesn't mean that it's not viable in those as well. So I do quite enjoy the Groza, and I think it's probably the best assault rifle in the entire class, all things considered. And it may not be like the prettiest looking gun, but it is very, very effective. All right, so coming in at number 3, which I'm really surprised to say this, unless Season 6 comes out and some new tac rifle gets added that just like beats the M16 out of the water, this gun is easily the best long-range weapon in the game, period. And the cool thing is you can build it in a variety of ways to make it more effective for round-based maps or Outbreak, and I actually have 2 different builds for these for the most part. I think the biggest difference is actually the barrel. I do prefer the Task Force one for Outbreak because you kind of need the extended like damage range on it, but you can actually run the fire rate barrel if you're playing a round-based map and most of your engagements are up close and it really doesn't matter a whole lot. But either way, it's just incredibly surprising that nothing has really topped this gun, and as far as, again, long-range weapons go, the M16 has remained at the top and the king of Cold War zombies since day one. Possible that could change, although I'm not so confident about it. We will have to wait and see. I am okay with the M16, however, being like basically the GOAT as far as that goes. But if you have any other suggestions for M16 loadouts for like very particular scenarios, feel free to leave them in the comment section, as there are actually a ton of ways to build this and for it to be effective for, you know, different scenarios and whatnot. All right, so coming in the number 2 spot, this hasn't really changed a whole lot compared to other rankings we've done, but of course it's going to be the Gallo shotgun. Now, I guess like the number 1 and 2 spot technically can be interchangeable if you really want to. I think at the end of the day though, the Gallo has like just basically an objectively best attachment setup for, you know, this weapon, and this is basically what it's going to look like. The Task Force barrel is, again, obviously the most important one, and also surprisingly the laser sight. I played without a laser on some of the shotguns, and it's pretty wild how much weaker they feel because your pellets really aren't hitting as consistently. I've said it once, I'll say it again. My general rule of thumb is, as far as shotguns go, the Gallo is going to be better on anything, let's say Outbreak round 10 or under, and anything on round-based maps round 55 or lower. And that, ladies and gentlemen, leads us to our number 1 spot on this list, the big boy, the big brother to the Gallo, the Hauer shotgun. And you could argue that this is just straight up the best gun in the game, non-wonder weapons included, and especially with the optimized loadout, there is literally nothing that this weapon can't do. And we sit here pretty much at the end of Cold War Zombies, and again, Season 6's weapons haven't yet been revealed, but I am genuinely shocked that they didn't add any more shotguns that beat out these, like, on-disc ones, you know, the Gallo and the Hauer that were here on launch. Considering what they've done with like the SMG class and even the pistol class, I am so surprised that the shotguns didn't get the same treatment as well, and that, you know, anything didn't beat these out. The Street Sweeper was like a step in that direction, but it wasn't actually any better. But all things considered, the Hauer at the end of the day is still the high rounds king, and it's an absolutely so much fun to play. But anyways, guys, that is going to be it for the top 20 best overall loadouts in Cold War Zombies. It's crazy that we've had this many weapons added, and this is how they kind of all fell into their rank. Again, unless Season 6 brings a significant amount of weapons that really change the meta, this will likely be the way that the rankings are as final. So I hope you guys did enjoy the video today. If you did, please make sure to leave a thumbs up. It took me a long time to put together. That'd be very much appreciated. Subscribe if you're brand new to the channel. Also, make sure to go check out the merch before you go. Link will be in the description. And I also do stream over on Twitch. If you want to catch some of my content, it'll be over there, especially when I'm in Texas. You can go and follow that. Also link down below. But other than that, hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next stream or the next video. Take it easy. I'm going to go now, and peace out.